Hello everybody, my name is Ray. Welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. Today, we're going to be circling back to the Andy Stanley story and specifically talking about one of the more prominent responses to it, and that was from Sean McDowell. Now, Sean McDowell is not orthodox on the issue of homosexuality, and that will be made abundantly clear in this video because he hints at it and he does say some things himself. And the resources that he recommends are heretical on this issue, and the approach that he has is heretical on this issue as well. And that's what we're going to be focusing on in this video. And this is his breakdown on the Andy Stanley controversy, which is very plainly Andy Stanley's a heretic. And it's worth noting that Andy Stanley affirmed homosexuality before he denounced the inerrancy and authority of Scripture. He affirmed homosexuality back in 2013, 2012. And that was way before that he wrote Unhitched and then Irresistible. And now he has a parenting book coming out, despite the fact that he's gay affirming. So a lot of ironies with Andy Stanley, but Sean McDowell is not providing a good alternative to it. And, you know, this is a YouTuber with nearly 200,000 subs operating in the Christian space, yet he's not orthodox on this issue. So we're going to be breaking that down. But first, I want to let you know Evangelical Dark Web is a Christian news gathering and commentary ministry. You can support us over at our Patreon-like system at evangelicaldarkweb.org/join. But the least you can do is like this video, subscribe to the channel, to the podcast, if you are new. So we're going to be going to this video that he did 6 days ago. I wanted to get to this sooner, but I was on a road trip. So everything's been pre-recorded prior to that. And then someone sent me one of this video, and I checked it out, and there's some stuff here that's worth talking about. And the first clip we're going to be discussing are the so-called positives from Andy Stanley's unconditional conference. And there's some glaring issues in this. This was 100% a gay-affirming conference. But the way they're trying to frame this conference is that it's not... it is kind of gay-affirming, but it's not, you know, the same as Matthew Vines. They're kind of treating it like it's a step closer to orthodoxy than, say, Matthew Vines. That's kind of the gist of how they kind of approach this. But to be fair to Sean McDowell, he does say that he does not affirm homosexual marriage, and he does not believe that this is an agree to disagree on issue. So I just want to be clear about his positions up front before we let him explain some of his worst positions.
It's the critique. There's a lot of stuff here that you and I would say amen to and agree with and be grateful for. We don't want to miss any part of that. Now, just tell us, there's a lot of breakouts. We don't have time to go into all of them, but maybe just 2 or 3 that you thought are significant that help us understand what happened there.
Yeah, there was a breakout specifically for parents who have children that identify as transgender. And that was facilitated by a couple who has a transgender child. So they were able to give feedback to the parents, and lots of parents shared at that breakout. And that was a very interesting one that I attended. Of course, there are breakouts on how to minister to LGBT youth. There was one done by Julia Sadusky called Gender Dysphoria, Is It For Real? And I thought that was excellent. I've never heard Julia before, but I think she's an author or co-author with Mark Regeneris. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Mark Yarhouse.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And so she's like a therapist. Maybe it's a psychologist. I can't remember exactly, but very, very interesting, very helpful. I learned a lot in that one. And there was even a breakout.
Okay, got to pause right there. Mark Yarhouse is a complete heretic. And this is his protege who's co-authored a book on transgenderism with him. I've covered this in the past, but Mark Yarhouse is the mad gender scientist of Big Eva. They have used him to peddle side B theology in the church. Now, side B theology believes and teaches that homosexual desire and attraction is not sinful. It also teaches that homosexual identity is not sinful. So the term gay Christian is actually compatible with side B theology. Now, the Revoice movement, which is the embodiment of side B theology, would say that it is not, would say that the whole gay Christian identity is a controversial subject. Yet it's clear from the material of, say, Preston Sprinkle and a number of other side B proponents that, gay Christian is gay okay with them. Now, it's worth noting that side B is sort of a reference to, in the olden days, they had discs, CDs, or something that you could flip over and play the other side of. And I'm trying to point that out. That's where the side B thing comes from. It is a different era of music buying, and it's two sides of the same disc. Side A and side B. Side A being a shorthand for affirming, and then side B, I don't know what it's shorthand for. I believe the etymology is the whole discography metaphor. But it's two sides of the same disc. That's what's wrong with side B theology. It leads directly to side A.
On how to keep your marriage together, because they talked about how, wrestling with the challenge of a child who comes out as trans or gay or whatever it might be, that's going to cause a lot of strain on your marriage. And so how do you maintain your marriage? So, they're really hitting a whole bunch of areas on this, but overall it was trying to equip parents how to handle the challenges associated with this.
And it's worth noting that the founders of the conference, I believe, were the first breakout session that they talked about. And the founders are gay affirming. They're transgender affirming. And you're having those types of parents be the group leaders in a struggle session. So this is a gay affirming conference, and they're saying, oh, these were these positive things. Well, what were these positive things? You had a co-author with a heretic talk about transgenderism. That's a positive? So that's insane. That's insane, because Mark Yarhouse is, again, transgender affirming. So I want to skip ahead. Let's a clarification on Sean's concerns is the next section I want to watch.
I've taken high school students through books by Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins. I'm all for engaging different ideas, right? But when this is, this is sold at the conference and he's platformed, he writes in his book, this is Gushy's book, Changing Our Mind, the most recent version. He says, I'm instead asking whether devout gay and lesbian Christians might be able to participate in the covenantal marital sexual ethics standard, one person for life, faithful and exclusive, in a loving, non-exploitive, non-coercive, reciprocal relationship. That is the higher expression of Christian sexual ethics, which in fact a goodly number are already doing. I can't find a compelling reason to say no anymore. So, in fairness, at the beginning, he says, if you're not with me and you just learn to better care for and listen to gay people in the church, great. But then the rest of the book is making a biblical case, and he is on a campaign to get the church to adopt same-sex covenantal relationships, meaning as long as it's two people, it's non-exploitive, it's faithful, that qualifies as marriage, and we should accept them fully as is within the church. That is his agenda. That is his goal, and he's free to do so. But to be brought into the church, given a platform, sold that book without minimally any challenge to it, that is just opening up the door for some teaching that profoundly concerns me.
Yeah.
Now,
well said. I agree.
Sounds like you agree. Okay, so let me.
Again, their concerns are like the most obvious concerns. Like, obviously, the dude that wants to, peddle gay relationships in the church, yeah, that's obviously an issue. But is not the compromise, 4 compromises down the road a much bigger issue, because that's where people are actually going to get fooled. Like, God's elect's not going to fall for that. They're not going to fall for 2 dudes holding hands in churches. That's not what they're going to fall for. Or maybe, you know, if Revoice has their way, they will fall for that. But they're not going to fall for the gay marriage argument. But they will fall for the side B stuff. That's the issue. And side B theology is, you know, just ravaging the church. So we're going to skip ahead to this section by 3 models for approaching transgender ideology.
Okay, so that brings us to a breakout session you mentioned earlier about for parents with transgender kids. Now, Mark Yarbrough has, and I hope I don't mess
I want to say he meant Mark Yarhouse.
this up, but he basically has kind of 3 models for approaching transgender identities. One is the moral model, like it's wrong to do so if somebody has if somebody's transgender. The other model is like it's a disability. And then the other model is in certain times and in certain ways, a transition may be okay and may be permissible. I think that's how he frames it. Now, you got to keep in mind, Mark is a psychologist, and he is writing and engaging.
I'm definitely sure he's talking about Mark Yarhouse, because Mark Yarhouse's framework is that. I have read enough of him to know that that is his framework, and he is a psychologist.
In some of the highest level of conversation with fellow psychologists. He's not a pastor. So he's more just kind of presenting the data, allowing the church to decide rather than pushing one certain view on the church. That's just his role as a psychologist as I see it. So
that's wrong, because Mark Yarhouse presented data that showed that, you know, change therapy isn't harmful, but then says we should ban it and then opposes it. So that's Mark Yarhouse for you.
was this session saying, hey, here's different ways Christians approach this, up and down and negative, or was it kind of pushing one way?
Well, the breakout session with Julia Sadisky, again, I apologize if I'm not getting her name pronounced properly, but her breakout included those 3 lenses.
Oh, okay.
And I think the first lens she referred to as the integrity lens. The second one's a disability lens, and a diversity lens, right? So she talked about that, and she seemed to be more like open about, you know, the different approaches you could take. In fact, I even asked her afterwards about like, where does she ground identity, like from an anthropology, because she's a Christian. You know, is your identity mostly in your body or your gender identity and stuff like that? So she was, you know, thoughtful about that and kind of answered that. But the other breakout I went to was specifically for parents who have children who identify as transgender. And there was a facilitator for that. And maybe 90% or so of the parents that were there were able to speak and share their stories and talk about their children and whatever. And what shocked me was every single parent who shared, the discussion seemed to presume that transitioning socially, hormonally, or surgically was permissible, biblically speaking. The only question really that was being discussed there was, okay, how do you cope? How do you still love your child? How do you kind of navigate that conversation, that question? And I was just, honestly, I was surprised, because I thought to myself, okay, this is probably where a lot of Christians are going to say, we can't go there, right? We can't just go and adopt, you know, taking a position where, you're going to try to change your body to match your gender identity, right? Your gender identity is this psychological belief that could be errant, that could change over time, and yet you're going to now make permanent decisions to your body that are going to try to reflect that gender identity. I thought this is where they're going to say no, but I'm not exaggerating, and I'm trying to think of any example where any person was like against that, and there wasn't.
Wow.
They did ask, like, hey, well, you know, when will this get easier for me, or how do you cope with this? But it was all presumed that it's morally permissible to do it.
So it's worth bringing up again. When they brought up positives of this conference, they talked about that exact same session. So, oh, it was so positive that we had all these parents sharing, and then all of a sudden now you're saying, well, actually, they were all affirming, and this whole conversation is about how do we deal with how affirming we are? How do we, cleanse our consciences of this sin that we're committing on our own child? How do we cleanse our consciences of child sex abuse? Because that's what they're doing. That's what these parents are doing. And he framed that as a positive, and he didn't even frame that as the negative that it was just then, because that's what these parents are doing. So next section I want to talk about is the whole celibate thing, because this is, again, Sean McDowell not being biblical on this issue.
Is it a bad message to tell kids with same-sex attraction that they have to be celibate? Isn't it better to have somebody with same-sex attraction be in a monogamous gay relationship than not married at all? And I would say a couple things. Is it bad to tell a kid with same-sex attraction that they have to be celibate? If marriage is open to people of the same sex, then it is bad to tell them that they uniquely have to be celibate and cannot experience this union. But if the Bible is clear, and I think it is, and we're not making this case here, that there are two ways to live in God-honoring, faithful relationships: singleness or celibacy, and if so, you're not sexually active, or marriage, which is one man, one woman, one flesh, one lifetime. If that's the biblical sexual ethic, then it's not only not bad to tell kids with same-sex attraction that they have to be celibate, it's good because it's leading them towards being in right relationship with God and flourishing in the way God designed them to. So therefore, it's not better to have somebody with same-sex attraction in a monogamous gay relationship, because such a relationship is not honoring to the Lord. That's my 2 cents. What would you add?
So I want to pause right there, because it's important to note that when Paul talks about celibacy, I believe it's 1 Corinthians 7, it doesn't apply to people who struggle with sexual sin. People who struggle with sexual sin are clearly burning with passion, and they're not called to celibacy. Like, if you look at Paul's situation, we don't know whether Paul was a widower or whatever his situation was. We do know he was a Pharisee of Pharisees, and that might have entailed marriage, I believe. But that Paul's in a much different life situation than the person who's single in their 20s and being told, oh, singleness is a gift. Not really. It's part of the affliction that ails our society, is the rise of marriage age and the loneliness of millennials and stuff like that. This is not a gift. This is, products of a dying culture that people can't find love. It's not a gift. But he's trying to, he's appealing to that type of language, to this type of Big Eva mindset that singleness is good, just be celibate and honor God. And it's like, people, we know that sexual sin is wrong, but you're telling people who burn with desire that, you're called to celibacy and singleness is a gift, and that's not true. And celibacy, while not confronting sinful desire, is going to lead to, we're going to seek affirming someone who will affirm our sin, because, celibacy for someone who struggles with sexual sin isn't the most ideal pathway. It's a bad sell. So I don't see how the person who thinks that, I'm going to identify as a celibate gay Christian doesn't eventually just slip into, the other alternative that he posited with that false dichotomy. And the last clip that I want to show you is towards the end.
That's the biblical way to go forward.
And by the way, the people I mentioned earlier, Sam Albury, Rachel Gilson, Preston Sprinkle, Rosaria Butterfield, Beckett Cook, although there's differences in that group, they're all trying to find that dance between grace and truth, although they just might land a little differently how they do so.
Right.
That third way, people have been trying to do it for a while. You've been doing it 2 decades. I've been trying to do it 2 decades. And that is the
Sam Alberry, Preston Sprinkle, and Rachel Gilson. 3 heretics that he just listed there. They all peddle homosexuality in the church. Sam Alberry is the founder of Living Out. This organization is super gay. It is super gay affirming. Living Out. It's a UK-based organization because Sam Alberry is British. He was one of the major red flags on Ravi Zacharias. And we all know that Ravi Zacharias had some sexual sin in his life. And I don't think that's a coincidence that he was, peddling side B theology on the side as well with Sam Alberry in his camp. Rachel Gilson is the person who, if you remember, I did a video on this, struggles with the question of personal pronouns and preferred pronouns. She thinks that's a difficult issue that there's room to disagree on. So, and she's super woke. She's also side B, very openly side B, peddled by Big Eva for some reason. I don't know why, but she just is. Number 3, he said Preston Sprinkle. Now, Preston Sprinkle is taken seriously because I believe he went to the Master's Seminary once upon a time. So he's been taken seriously kind of ever since by the Reformed Evangelical crowd, but he's kind of lost favor with them, but he has enough gravitas in other circles. And he's trusted on sexual sin, even though he went to Revoice. He's a Revoice speaker. He has his own institution, Center for Sexuality and Gender or something like that, Faithfulness or something like that. Very much does not think that same-sex attraction is sinful. That's a red line. You cross the red line. So a lot of issues with Preston Sprinkle's theology. He mentioned Beckett Cook, who I don't think has any issues on the same-sex attraction front. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Rosaria Butterfield is actually pretty based. So he mentioned 2 people I'm going to frame on the good side for, I know Rosaria Butterfield's position. She's actually repented of being in the side B camp. She's called that sin, so she would not agree with Sean McDowell's statement there. Beckett Cook I don't know enough about, but I'm going to defer in his favor out of grace. So he just named 3 heretics on this issue, framing them as good guys.
The biblically faithful way moving forward. I don't know what's going to happen with the fallout from this. I'm not a prophet at all. Ideally, Stanley would hear this and he'd step back and be like, you know what, I was mistaken. I overreached on this one and make corrections. That'd be beautiful. There is a lot of grace in the Christian church for that. Now, honestly, there would be some people who would be suspicious and, because he's been having conversations about this with a lot of people you and I know for a long time and has thought this through. But if he doesn't, I think this is going to continue to divide the church further. And I think, it'll be interesting to see in 5 and 10 years looking back where we're at. But for me, the bottom line question is, what does the Bible teach? And I would change my position if so.
I want to pause right there. I actually do see a unification around Andy Stanley. Maybe it's like Bane telling the one guy, they expect one of us in the wreckage. Maybe it's that, but, aside from Ed Stetzer, we covered that last week, and Christianity Today, which is no surprise, it's owned by or ran by Russell Moore. Christian Post even condemned Andy Stanley. They ran like 3 or 4 articles hammering Andy Stanley. Not necessarily framing him as a believer either. They wrote a news article that basically had a quote from someone. I mean, they used someone else to do it. I believe it was Denny Burke. So that, they chose one of the good, the big evil, people that occasionally says something conservative. They chose someone like that to say that Andy Stanley was a heretic. But Big Eva's kind of like coming down on Andy Stanley a little bit. I mean, I haven't seen the Gospel Coalition say anything. Shocker, they're not super relevant, but there's kind of been a unification around Andy Stanley that, let's take him out.
Someone could convince me either that the scripture is fine with same-sex unions of any kind, or this is an agree to disagree issue, like the age of the earth, women in the church, as important as those are. I wouldn't even put this issue on the level of those at all. With that said, I hope folks will check out what you're doing at Stand to Reason, and I hope they sense from you a pastoral, a very caring voice, because I know you're that person, but also a very careful thinker.
I'm going to pause right there because I'm not going to wait for him to peddle his own thing, because he's going to talk about how he's doing a sexual ethics class at Biola University, which is pretty liberal, actually. And Biola University, their dean of theology, I believe, is Ed Stetzer. I believe he's their dean of theology. I might be mistaken on the title that he has there, but it's like Ed Stetzer, gay affirming, super gay affirming. But, he, in some way or another, might be Sean McDowell's boss over there. Maybe not directly boss as far as chain of command goes or org chart goes, but higher up. And that's pretty bad, man. So I don't know if Sean McDowell's self-aware about that, the person that's probably higher up on the corporate ladder at Biola University, gay affirming. That's Ed Stetzer, who has failed upward everywhere he's gone in Big Eva and has been tolerated. We already did that video, though. But Sean McDowell is peddling side B theology while trying to attack Andy Stanley. And it led to some inconsistencies, like when they said, "Oh, this breakout conference was a positive because got parents talking," and then they later on said, "Well, the parents were saying, how do we deal with this?" And the assumption was that this was morally permissible. So, a lot of stuff wrong here with the response, and it just shows you need to get to the Bible and what the Bible says about same-sex attraction, sinful desire, homosexuality, transgenderism, which is really just a perversion. Most of the time it's a fetish. And then, what are they saying? Does it match? It doesn't match. Spoiler alert. So, anyway, we're going to shine a light on that. Have a blessed day, and we will catch you on the next one.